So we have our last section of Flash Talk presentations for you. And as we've done previously, we will have 3 of the Flash Talk presenters back to back talking about their work. And then you'll have the opportunity to choose which one of these groups of authors you would like to visit in our last breakout groups of the day. So the first presenters will be Beth McCormack and Denise Monnier from who will be talking about the chicken or the egg, policy or access, which came first. Porsche Boddicker-Young will talk about equitable access to public pre-K Montessori. And then I think pronunciation, her name was Lila, if I remember right, implementing Montessori methods in early childhood Saudi classrooms. So remember, as you're hearing folks talk, whether you want to go to 1, 2, or 3, but I will turn it over, and I believe Denise should have the screen sharing privileges for her group.
Let me make sure I have that ready for you all. Sorry about that.
Nope.
Denise.
We're slowing down. It's late in the day.
It is late
Denise,
in the day.
you're ready, Denise, and I'm going to do Porsche.
Stop my sharing. You have all the names, Stephanie, before I stop sharing.
What's the very last name? The last group.
Lila?
Lila? L-I-L-A, right?
Yes. All right.
We're all set.
Perfect.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for hanging in here on this Friday at 3:30. But I do feel this is a great way to close out a really busy week in terms of gathering all these ideas and even just the rest of the weekend to let them percolate in our brains as we go about cooking meals and going for walks. So thank you really for putting all this together. This is really a great experience to hear everyone's ideas, especially in the midst of a pandemic. So I'll just introduce ourselves. I believe that's the next slide. Yes. So I'm Beth McCormack, and I am wearing one role today with MPPI and the state advocacy group for Ohio. And I'm also the director of Montessori programs at Tremont Montessori in Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And some of my colleagues, thank you for joining us, are also on today. So it's a great conversation that I know that we'll continue back at our own home district.
And I'm Denise Monnier. I am the director of advocacy for the Montessori Public Policy Initiative. I'm the person who works with the state advocates on the ground, working for change in state policy. And so Beth is one of my state representatives. And I just want to echo her expression of our gratitude for being able to participate here these last couple of days and hearing all of these presentations and joining in these conversations. It's been really valuable for me. So thank you for the opportunity.
So we're kind of moving into I want to ground us sort of where we are and how MPPI contributes and where we fit in sort of what we're doing today. And so the mission of MPPI, as many of you know, is really about a world enriched and made equitable through widely accessible and fully implemented Montessori education. So I feel like what better goal than this to sort of launch us into the next part of our talk today. And just as a reminder, what Dr. Marie has set up in terms of and started and launched as part of today, and her whole team, but in thinking about how we're disseminating information, research, and evaluation. And so hopefully Denise and our conversation today will add to the dissemination and thought process as how it reflects to policy implications.
So just a little bit of background about MPPI. We do work with state advocates in every state to try to create pathways so that public Montessori programs or publicly funded programs can directly hire fully prepared Montessori teachers, which means that we need systems or pathways within those state policies to make sure that those Montessori teacher education programs are recognized as being able to prepare those teachers fully to lead the classrooms. Oh, I'm okay. Someone else did that. Great, terrific. I got someone in the room and I was like, oh, how exciting. So while there are so many similarities, every state still has their own set of regulations in terms of what they're looking for with programs providing preparation for teacher licensure. And what our advocates are trying to do is educate those policymakers as to, first of all, the details and particulars of what Montessori teacher preparation entails, and then to really help those policymakers fit those requirements and that process into their framework for recognizing for credentialing. It's a lot of work with education, and those policymakers can range from folks who work for maybe departments of education through the full state legislature. So that's a very large job. And so we try to advocate for something very consistent. We want to see that from state to state, a teacher could move from one state to another and have the same sort of process to be able to get their credential recognized, and also to hopefully create some kind of critical mass of states that have these pathways, so that a state that's interested in looking at the process sees something that's pretty replicable and pretty simple, instead of lots of variety between the different processes from state to state. So what we advocate for here is for credentials from MACD accredited institutions. So MACD is the national accreditor of Montessori teacher education programs, both within institutions of higher education and freestanding, and they are recognized by the US Department of Education for that role. So we use them as our marker of quality. So those credentials to be recognized as a pathway to some kind of Montessori educator license or state teacher license, along with a bachelor's degree in any area. And also, if states require of incoming teachers that they pass any sorts of assessments such as praxis or a general skills exam, we also add those to our list. So that's our basic ask in every state.
So I want to just say some of the ideas for our work today really came out of, pain points and points of frustration in my own work, and many phone calls with Denise on my front porch, trying to figure out who knew what in Ohio. So we're based in Ohio, which, as you'll see, is a pathway state. And even within the state, no one knew who was on first. And so this sort of came out as a way to put it on the table in terms, as I figured, if MPBI has all this data and we're trying to move forward, if I was the one, actively on the ground and also trying to be a state advocate, if I couldn't access the people who could help us move this forward to have really qualified teachers in our public Montessori school, that I probably was not alone. So this is sort of the three our project aims that at least will start this conversation. So in terms of how we're creating greater access for our teachers in the public sector, in terms of and how the benefits then would roll out for schools and local communities. Thinking about how we have high quality Montessori teachers and then high quality access for our students in the public sector, because these are two entwined areas that I think are often sort of missing from parts of conversations. And then just in terms of, the what next, in terms of expanding a research agenda so that we all move towards greater and higher quality access for our students. So, and I'm just going to launch this piece off. So this is work that MPPI has, and Denise will talk a little bit more about this in terms of what we know so far. And so we all know, or maybe all of us know, I'm sure, that in public Montessori schools, teachers hold both a state teaching license and then are also, so just normal, they have a state teaching license. However, in our Montessori schools, you need both your Montessori credential and your teaching license, which ends up being, sometimes we talk about a double jeopardy for people trying to have a greater access to teaching in Montessori schools. And so this is partly sort of where this is reflected then in the work that Denise is going to share.
And so, you know, Mary Beth was talking about how our back porch conversations and how this idea came up. And we were talking about, because when Mira was presenting before about the different things that affect access and equity in programs. And we were thinking, like, we just looked at this one really tiny slice of what she does this broad amount of research on. So this isn't in any way meant to negate those other things. It's just that this is what our conversations were about. And just a couple of things about, so there are 10 states right now in the United States where there is a pathway that teachers with Montessori credentials can use to obtain a state teaching license. We, like I said before, really push towards this consistency and recognition, but it is a really tough fight in every state. And there are so many pitfalls to trying to get this recognition. And so over the course of, you know, more than a decade, maybe even 2 of them, states have come up with sort of different things that they have set up for teachers. And I'll call out a couple of them that are more inconsistent than others. In Hawaii, to get that state teaching license, your coursework has to be processed through a specific university. So the state itself doesn't actually provide the credential. It's that university is an approved institution, and their program gets you that, but you can transfer in credits from any MACD accredited university or institution. So that's an unusual pathway. And then also in Virginia, so the folks in Virginia went to their legislature with a proposal that read kind of like the last slide I was reading to you about what we asked for. And what they ended up with is that individual school districts are allowed to create a license, a specialty license based on a special program that they have within their school district. So a school district with Montessori can establish a Montessori educator's license, but it only works for their school district. So those are things that allow practice, but aren't really statewide policies directly pointed at Montessori. So just a couple, most of the other ones on this list have very similar requirements. So I just thought I'd point those 2 out.
So this is, I'm noticing in the chat, right? So this work now has 10 states. And, you know, part of our conversations were like, hey, how do we move the needle a little bit faster? And can we see, you know, impacts in reflected in our, you know, our public schools who are Montessori? And so we are grateful to all the public data that currently exists. And so folks with the Montessori census for NCMPS, David did some culling instead of moving the map around on the Montessori census. So thank you, made our work easier. And then Melanie over at AMS, thank you again for the pathway data download, which was also super helpful. And Lynn at AMI, and of course the team at MPPI, who's been, you know, data collecting and working on this for many years. So just to acknowledge that this is all the sort of what we were trying to understand is the relationship between the 10 states that do have the pathways most explicitly, at least in terms of a starting point, and seeing the impacts across the board, as we'll sort of see in the next few slides, what we found.
So this slide is organized by the 10 states in the right column that all have that pathway to state teacher licensure for Montessori credentialed teachers. And if you sort of peruse through, you can see that while South Carolina does have, according to the census, the most public schools or the most public programs of any state, and they do have credential recognition. In some states, there's a correlation between having that option, and in some states, which I purposely left in a few at the bottom that don't have recognition, but do have large numbers of public programs. And so, well, when we first got this information, we were sort of, and came to the conclusion that there's definitely a lot more digging that needs to be done, because we don't have any information about these programs and what they're really like and how they function in terms of their teachers and the teacher preparation. And then the other thing we thought about was the most obvious earmarks or researchable earmarks of quality in those classrooms would be if they're accredited by AMS, or at least on the pathway, or if they're AMI recognized. And if you look at those, you can see also that there is not any really huge correlation between those things and being able to get that state teaching license for your Montessori credential. Since those pathways all require that teachers have a credential from the accreditor or from MACD, we thought that we'd see a higher level, but we didn't really at this point.
And I think this is just something also just to note, just in terms of, that only the 10 states that do have this pathway. And sort of, I feel like this is a great baseline to see how this may or may not shift in terms of understanding who gets on the pathway or who is recognized, and how the dynamics of the pieces sort of play out.
So, and these are the states with the most public Montessori. And I think, again, you can see there is not a really strong correlation between the states with the most public Montessori and those who have the licensure pathway, or have these 3 specific quality markers.
And this is just like, as Denise, we're sort of reflecting on this. I feel like we could sit here for a lot longer, which maybe if you come with us to the breakout session, we can really sit on these. In terms of, thinking about policy work and advocacy work, understanding even more specifically sort of what the levers are. We were talking about in the previous, breakout session about what the levers are in terms of creating policy that allows greater access both for teachers and greater access to a greater amount of public Montessori schools. And so this, in terms of being efficient in our advocacy work, in terms of creating policies that are specifically designed to benefit our schools and our students and our teachers, for our work, and the work is really, thinking about what the next steps are.
Agreed. And we've also had some pretty extensive conversations about what we're talking about when we say quality Montessori programs, and what those quality markers are for public Montessori programs. We have the accreditors and their rankings, and then we have the MPPI Montessori Essentials, but I don't think we have time to bring that up, but I'll put the link in the chat after we're finished. But we feel like we really need some kind of manifesto to guide programs towards a unified understanding of what we mean when we say quality public Montessori programs. And that really could be informing all Montessori programs in terms of, how to be relevant in these times.
So in the sort of closing and preparation for a breakout session, we really want to think about this expanding research agenda, which I certainly don't have to tell this group why it's important, but just in thinking about what we have laid out in terms of really understanding this landscape of providing public Montessori programs to the greatest amount of students and teachers. And also thinking about that more widespread research, which is what we just touched upon, about understanding all the elements that really do provide to true increased access. Just understanding those levers and subtleties so that we can make a little bit more uniform and effective, policy changes in addition to sort of outcomes as well. And then, yep. And so this is sort of just to review sort of our, what we are, what we found out and what we've explored is that, our questions that we'd like to pose is that how do we actually more fully understand this relationship between well-prepared Montessori educators and access to public programs? I've heard many different themes, even just here today and yesterday, that I think are worth exploring and putting out. Denise touched upon this in terms of how do we analyze quality in Montessori programs, whether they're private or public in any form. And, as you know, MPPI is a collaborative between AMS and AMI. So a way of sort of bringing people together in terms of talking about what is done well. And then thinking a little bit more, certainly about the policies that we sort of blocked out around teacher licensure programs and access to public Montessori programs. I know that's alive and well in the work that we're doing in our district, and really thinking about how does that look, and currently thinking forward and how we can make some really positive movement of the needle there as well. And then we're hoping you'll join us for the breakout session and to talk about, future steps that are really alive and well for you. And then I don't know if Denise, we have, I think, 1 more minute if you want to add anything else.
I'll just add that MPPI is just about to start work on a project exploring some of these areas. And so, well, we'll ask in the breakout sessions, but we're definitely looking for more information to build our survey and our data collection. So thank you.
Wonderful. I think we will transition to the next speaker. I believe, Portia, that is your group. So you should have the ability to share your screen.
Yes, let me see if I can do this. All right, is everybody able to see that?
What a smooth transition.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon. The title of our presentation is Equitable Access to Public Montessori Pre-K. So first, I'll just walk us through our project team, go through a little bit of a background information in our study overview, and then go through some of our preliminary findings and then some group discussion questions that we'll have for our breakout room. So my name is Porsche Boddicker-Young. I'm a research scientist at Child Trends, and I'm here presenting on behalf of my team. I'm joined here today, I think, by some of my project team. Our senior advisors, Diane Early and Joy Thompson, my co-PI, Danielle Hegseth, our research analyst, who I don't think is on the line, Rowan Hilty, and then our research assistant, Jackson Fojet. We are also doing this work in collaboration with our consultant, Delia Allen, and the work is funded by the Brady Education Foundation. But before I jump into the work, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on Child Trends for those that might not know. Child Trends is, we consider ourselves the nation's leading research organization, focused exclusively on improving the lives of children and youth, especially those most vulnerable. We really work to ensure that all kids thrive by conducting independent research and partnering with practitioners and policymakers to apply that knowledge. We believe that programs and policies that serve children are most effective when they're informed by data and evidence and grounded in deep knowledge of child and youth development. We have 3 offices across the country, with our main office in Bethesda, Maryland, but then also have offices in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I actually think we have a representative from each office on our team, which is also fun. So first, like I mentioned, I'll just go through a little bit of background information and then our study overview. So these are things that I'm sure a lot of people in this room are very familiar with, but why not talk about it more? Equitable access to public Montessori pre-K is impacted by enrollment policies, and these can include lottery and recruitment practices. Montessori enrollment policies vary widely across schools and districts and states, but really more information is needed to understand the mechanisms by which these practices really impact equitable access to public Montessori pre-K programs. We know that Montessori is very important to continue investigating because it is one of the most prominent curricula used in specialized pre-K programs. Also, it was originally developed to promote equitable access to high quality early education and flexible teaching for children in underserved communities. And I think, as we'll see as a theme across this presentation, Montessori theme and practice really influenced individualized teaching practices that puts equity at the center of the Montessori curriculum. So in collaboration with the Brady Education Foundation, our team really wanted to deeply examine schools' recruitment and enrollment policies. And we chose to focus on Montessori because its pedagogy, as I mentioned previously, really puts equity at the center of the curriculum. We also aren't aware of any other research that's examined families' perceptions of public Montessori programs, which plays a really, it has a huge impact on issues of access. And as I've mentioned, our current study is really focused on this equitable access to public Montessori pre-K. Many public Montessori programs admit students through a random lottery process. However, our initial efforts to study public Montessori pre-K indicated that certain enrollment policies may create barriers to access, especially for African American and Latin families, or those experiencing lower socioeconomic status. Examples of barriers to access could include lottery priority status for siblings, neighborhood residents, children of staff, a lack of targeted recruitment practices for families from underserved communities, and then just cost. Even though the schools in our study are public or free for kindergarten, many still charge tuition at the pre-K level or have limited financial aid available. So we're really still learning what the landscape of these schools and communities look like, but we do know that families from different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds experience opportunity and educational disparities. And really, questions of equity should be at the center of policy development and analysis. So we have really one great example of why we're really doing this work. In 2018, a school district found that families living within the city's most affluent attendance areas had been receiving priority access to a highly coveted and sought after Montessori pre-K based on address rather than on actual need. And it was estimated that these families received this free education, were receiving nearly $30,000 in free education over 2 years when compared to neighboring Montessori schools. A year before the article was actually released, it was found that all pre-K seats in this school were filled by either neighborhood children or siblings of existing students, while nearly 700 out-of-boundary students sat on the socioeconomic tier wait list. And over the past 5 years, only 4 children living outside of the school's boundaries who didn't have a sibling at the school were admitted into this pre-K program. So this article notes that hundreds of the parents living outside of the school's zones are and were battling admission processes that were stacked against them from the beginning in a way not encountered by other parents. 98% of the students from this school came from the wealthiest step on the district's socioeconomic scale, and that percentage just continued to rise every year. Nearly 1/3 of 3-year-olds who entered this program moved on to expensive private schools after completing this free program. Something interesting about the school was that they transitioned to a magnet school 13 years ago in order to reduce what they called minority group isolation by increasing white attendance at the school. And since then, the number of white students had skyrocketed, while Hispanic enrollment had leveled and Black enrollment had drastically decreased. So to an extent, findings like that really guided a lot of the work and a lot of our research questions and interests that we have. And for our study purpose, we're ultimately trying to understand public Montessori recruitment and enrollment practices and how they might promote or limit families' access to public Montessori pre-K. And we have 3 really big research questions. The first is, what are public Montessori schools' pre-K recruitment and enrollment policies, and to what extent are they equitable? Second, to what extent do the demographic characteristics of schools' student bodies align with or match the characteristics of the surrounding communities? And then lastly, what are families' perceptions of public Montessori pre-K compared to other early education options, and what are perceived barriers to accessing these programs? Our 3 research questions really had 3 main tasks. And the first was to understand the national landscape of public Montessori programs. So using a list of public Montessori schools from the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector as just a starting point, we developed a comprehensive data set that included program characteristics and other publicly available information. Data were collected using a combination of online research and calls and emails to school. And then this data set was merged with other publicly available data sources like the American Community Survey and the Civil Rights Data Collection. And then using this merged data set, we developed metrics for describing and comparing the demographic characteristics of the community where the Montessori school operates, and then the demographics of the school student bodies. For our second task, we were really interested in exploring public Montessori's recruitment and enrollment practices. So using the data set and the key contacts that we got under task 1, we identified a subset of Montessori schools that are both public and offer some pre-K programming, so they serve 3 or 4-year-old children. And we invited administrators at the school to complete an online survey about their school's recruitment and enrollment practices. And then lastly, we were really interested in understanding families' perceptions of Montessori pre-K and other early education options. So we think it's really important to hear the perspectives of both families with a child enrolled in Montessori and families with a child enrolled in another type of childcare. Gathering these perspectives from families who choose Montessori and who choose other ECE options will be important for understanding just this full range of perspectives around these programs, as well as any barriers to access. So both families from both Montessori and other ECE programs were recruited for the interviews. For task 1, which is our national landscape scan, we identified 288 public Montessori schools. The 288 schools in our task 1 landscape data set were taken from a 2017 list from the National Center for Montessori in the public sector. And we also cross-referenced this list with the schools we recruited for a previous study and with other resources like the Trust for Learning data set. So ultimately, we pared this list down to identify schools that we felt were truly public Montessoris and served children at least as young as kindergarten. 266 of these schools were matched with admin data to analyze school versus community makeup. For our second task, which was about recruiting and enrollment practices, 39 public Montessori school administrators completed a survey about their pre-K recruitment and enrollment practices during the 2019-20 school year. And 39 schools from 19 states and the District of Columbia are represented in the survey. I think we all know, due to the onset of COVID, we had a difficult time recruiting schools and administrators. Understandably, schools were occupied with just navigating this new normal of virtual school and all of the obstacles that come with that, while also ensuring that their children and their families were safe. And then lastly, for task 3, which was based around family perceptions, to date, we've had 10 families from 3 states take part in an interview, and we've had 8 families with a child in Montessori interview, while we've had 2 families from a child in another type of childcare interview. Family interviews are still in progress, and our focus is on conducting more interviews with families whose children are in another type of childcare, so non-Montessori, in communities that have a public Montessori option. Next, I'll just walk us through some of our preliminary findings. As a reminder, this project is still ongoing, so all of these findings are preliminary. But here are some of the key takeaways from our landscape data. And as I go through this, just please be aware that public Montessori for us means it is free for kindergarten. And because most schools serve multiple age groups like pre-K through elementary, percentages total to more than 100. So most public Montessoris serve preschool and elementary age children. So as you can see, about 11% serve children younger than 3-year-olds, 82% for 3-year-olds, 100% for 4-year-olds, 97% for kindergarten, 91% for elementary, and then it dips down to 41% for middle school and 5% for high school. 32% of these schools were charter and 25% were magnet schools. 32% were free for all students, with many others offering subsidies or financial aid for pre-K children. And then 53% use a lottery process to enroll new students, while 23% admit on a first come, first served basis. And then lastly, 64% typically have a wait list each school year. And here are some of the key takeaways from our administrative data. So we're in the process of developing metrics to assess the extent to which school student bodies match or represent the demographic characteristics of their surrounding communities, considering both race, ethnicity, and income. And as I go through this, we define majority as greater than 50% of a given racial ethnic group, and diverse indicates that no single racial ethnic group made up more than 50% of the specified population. So here the blue in the graphs represents the public Montessori, while the orange represent the communities with Montessori schools. And as you can see, many Montessori schools have majority white or diverse student bodies, while most public Montessori schools are located in majority white communities. We're still conducting analyses on the school survey. The preliminary data presented here are really meant to highlight potential barriers to equitable access, and we plan to explore that further in the coming months. So from our school survey, we found that 37% offer transportation options for all students, 29% for some students, and 34% offer no transportation options. And I think, as we all know, transportation could be a huge barrier to accessing a quality education. 54% offer free or reduced price lunch to all students, and 39% offer to some students. 37% charge some tuition at the pre-K level, and all offer at least half-day kindergarten for free. 46% require families to live in a certain region or like a school district or attendance zone to apply for enrollment. Through the school survey, we also really wanted to explore students' admission process. Admission processes are not mutually exclusive. Most schools have a combination of these three main practices. And we also asked about recruitment and engagement strategies for new families. While most schools did report that they have a recruitment plan, additional analyses are underway to really determine the extent to which these intentionally target families from underserved communities. So we asked Montessori schools if they have a wait list every or most school year, and how they admit students, whether through some lottery process on a first come, first served basis, or with automatic priority of preferential admission for certain students. As you can see, 87% of participating schools who served 3-year-olds reported having a waitlist for the 3-year slots in the 2019 school year, 83% for that 4-year-old group, and then 80% for the 5-year-old group. 77% of participating schools who serve 3-year-olds reported admitting students through some lottery process for 3-year-old slots in the 2019 school year, 67% for our 4-year-old group, and then 75% for our 5-year-old group. 20% of participating schools who serve 3-year-olds reported admitting students on a first come, first served basis for that 3-year-old group in the 2019 school year, while 33% reported for 4-year-old slots, and then the 25% for 5-year-old slots. And then lastly, 80% of participating schools who serve 3-year-olds reported admitting students with automatic, priority, or preferential admission for certain students for the 3-year-old slots in that 1920 school year, with 83% for the 4-year-olds and then 75% for the 5-year-olds. As I mentioned, family interviews are still in progress, and our focus is really on conducting more interviews with families whose children are in another type of childcare in communities with a public Montessori option. In these next 2 slides, we are highlighting an interview with one family, and I'll go through some of the things that she mentioned. So one African-American mother in the Midwest with a 4- to 5-year-old child enrolled in a public Montessori school that does not charge tuition said that she was familiar with Montessori because she attended as a child and liked the style, but noted that the school was not very effective in their outreach or recruitment. She had a strong understanding of Montessori, noting its tailored curricula and pacing was one of the main reasons why she chose this option for her child. And she said they allow children to work at their own level. He's moving a little faster than his grade level, and at Montessori, they'll handle and press forward with that. She also said that a draw of the school was the racial diversity among students and staff, and felt that Montessori might pose challenges for some children. She said that I would say it's for a self-motivated child, you can really learn how to goof off and procrastinate if the educator can't redirect them. I do know people that went to Montessori and weren't pleased with the outcome because of that. And that really wraps up a lot of the preliminary findings that we have. As I mentioned, we are still conducting analyses and still hoping to do more interviews with families. And as I've mentioned throughout a lot of this project, our next steps for the study are to complete the family interviews, analyze all of the data, and then develop a full study report. And going into our breakout discussion, we've thought through some questions that we thought would stimulate a good conversation, and we're hoping that people can start to think through now before we really break out. We'd really like to know what questions or reactions would you like to share about the presentation, about the work that we're doing? What information about public Montessori really surprised you the most? In what ways does the information from our study reflect what you have seen in the field and what stands out? And what will be important for us to consider as we develop the final report and related projects? Thank you all so much. If you have any questions at all, just jot down my email or my co-PI's email right there, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It's exciting to see the work that you're doing and really quantifying some of the things that Mira has found in terms of those admission processes and concerns. So that's super helpful. So I think we will just shift gears to our final presenter of the day. Porsche, if you could stop sharing your screen, we will turn it over to our final Flash Talk presenter. And that is, am I saying your name correctly? Is it Lila or is it Layla?
Layla.
Layla, that's what I thought I heard you say.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, you're perfect.
Fantastic.
So can you see my screen now?
I believe we are. Do we see, is it your, there we are. Now we are seeing it.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Lila Alhashim and I'm from Saudi Arabia, and also I am in Saudi Arabia right now. It is 12 in the morning now and it is like 8 hours ahead. And so glad you guys, I enjoy you in this conference, guys. And I'll talk about a little bit about myself. I am now a PhD student in curriculum and instruction in early childhood education in the University of South Florida. I am, studying remotely from Saudi Arabia, and all my classes is 1 in the morning. So I used to be and stay for this time. My experience, my educational experience, I got a bachelor degree in Islamic studies and a master's degree in curriculum instruction in early childhood education from Winthrop University in South Carolina. And I also have a teaching experience as teacher, classroom teacher in Saudi Arabia, and a teacher in Montessori classrooms in the United States. So today, I am so happy to be with you guys to present one of my research paper about Montessori, which is implementing Montessori methods in Saudi early childhood classrooms. So why I am interested in this topic, because I found the importance of providing equal opportunity for children in Saudi Arabia. And I also will talk about how I come with Montessori and why I choose Montessori specifically as a method to have it more popular and publish more schools in Saudi Arabia. And also talk about what are the steps that guided my research, what I choose. I like follow 4 steps from the methods of Carriere to link my previous experience with my future practice as a future Montessori school leaders. The third thing is how Montessori school works in Saudi Arabia. So I'm gonna provide some example of Montessori in Saudi classrooms and how that can be aligned with Montessori, with Saudi culture and policy. So the research question is, the first question is, what are some barriers and opportunities to the adoption of Montessori approach to education in Saudi Arabia? And the second question is, in what ways can the educators modify the Montessori curriculum to align with the Islamic religion, Saudi curriculum and policy? So the first slide, why I am interested. So first, I am interested because I believe in Montessori philosophy, where children are the center as well as they are self-directed themselves. And this is my own teaching philosophy as well. So that also will lead to the kind of powerful learning that will remain with students for lifetime, as Nal stated. So also one of my working experience is to be a Montessori classroom teacher assistant in the United States. And the first moment that I entered the Montessori classroom, I could see the difference between the Montessori classroom and the traditional classroom that was just next door. So thus I chose the Montessori philosophy to design the curriculum in Saudi Arabia, because the curriculum that Maria Montessori advanced followed children's interest and need. So in the next slide, when I compare between American children and Saudi children, I found that American children has like more opportunity to attend Montessori classrooms and schools than than Saudi child. Because for example, when I was in Tampa, Florida, and I was searching about Montessori schools that is near me, I found too many Montessori schools was just located in my area. Where in Saudi Arabia, we do have Montessori schools, but it is a few. It is is like now it is growing, but still we need more Montessori schools. And this is one of my goals, is to establish more Montessori schools in Saudi Arabia. So that means that an American child would have more opportunity to attend Montessori schools than the Saudi child. Also, some Montessori schools in Saudi Arabia are not full Montessori schools, where it has 1 or 2 Montessori classroom, and the children are scheduled to go to the classroom once a day, and then they go back to their traditional classrooms. So even though the Montessori method was introduced by Maria Montessori, who is a Catholic follower, some Montessori educational method, concept, and principles have harmony of values with the principle of Islamic education psychology. Okay, in this slide, I will talk more about the Saudi curriculum. So the curriculum in Saudi Arabia is national, so all the schools in Saudi Arabia will follow the same curriculum and will have the same textbook. So the the Saudi schools have 3 main elements that all the Saudi schools follow. The first thing is Islamic religion. The foundation that it's most important of education in Saudi Arabia is to have the faith of Allah as God and Islamic as religion, and in Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a prophet and messenger. Thus, the Islamic religion is confirmed at all grade level in Saudi Arabia. The Quran and Sunnah, what I mean by Sunnah is what Prophet, peace be upon him, words, are one of the leading education Saudi goals in Saudi education system. The next element is the Saudi policy. It also has a major role in the curriculum, where the children study about founder of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who was King Abdulaziz Al Saud. And the children show how they are going to serve the country and how they show their love and support. Talking about the last element, which is the other organization, and in this point, I'll talk about specifically an early childhood age level. So we have just adapted in Saudi Arabia NACES, which is the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And it is the most recent additional Saudi curriculum. And the Ministry of Education is still working on it to have it in as standard in all early childhood schools in Saudi Arabia. The other organization is AGF Fund, which is Arabic Gulf Program for United Nations Development Organization. And the third organization is the UNICEF, which is the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. So what are the steps? So from the curriculum theorist, William Pinner in 1994, I used the method of career, and I really loved the way that I used it because it's organized my idea and the research, where I use the steps to link my previous experience with my future experience to provide background information on my decision about the educational practice that I will discuss in this paper and in the presentation. So the methods of career contain 4 steps, which is regression, progression, analysis, and synthesis. The first step is regression. And this step, I went back to my experience in education in Saudi Arabia as a child, as a teacher in Saudi Arabia and in the United States. So as a child, I figured out that my teacher guided my education and guided my practice. I remember that I had to do homeworks when I was a young child, and the teacher made sure that I completed daily. From my experience in Saudi Arabia as a teacher in a traditional school, I was nervous as I always wanted to make sure that I applied all the curriculum requirements and followed the time plan. I was under pressure when a Ministry of Education advisor observed my classroom because I wanted to make sure that I followed the requirements that she asked for. So it is like Saudi Arabia, like most of the countries, we followed most of the time traditional, traditional curriculum. So it limits the teacher and children freedom. But I think about the question, does that mean that Islamic culture allow less freedom? So I found that Islamic culture allow more freedom for children to choose whatever they want. So for example, we encourage children in young age to pray, and we show the benefits of praying, but we do not force them to pray. We have or let them to choose whatever, if they want to pray or if they do not want to pray. So they have the freedom of their practice. So thus, even though we found that the teacher as center in most of the early childhood education classroom in Saudi Arabia, however, applying child-centered philosophy didn't contracted Islamic culture. The experience made my decision to integrate the Montessori curriculum to be aligned with the Ministry of Education rules and regulation. All the experience that I had, that I gone through, have shaped my choice, goals, and decision to apply Montessori school in Saudi Arabia. Okay, the next step is progression, which is where I project myself as a Saudi early childhood Montessori school leader who plans to provide the opportunity for the teachers and children to enjoy the process of teaching. Okay, in the analysis, I connected the two steps together, and I came up with the objective to allow for more freedom for children in their learning process and less pressure for the teachers to meet traditional curriculum requirements. So according to Bernard 1994, the experience helps decide the quality of the future experience. This is why I love about like the method of Kariri, and I used it. Also, one of the researchers stated that in early childhood, it's good to combine the Montessori methods with the Islamic method to help maximize building character education in early childhood. So in early childhood years, teachers in Saudi Arabia are more focused on teaching children how to respect each other and how to provide love and cooperation as its supportive part on Islamic value and morality. I found this is supported by Montessori methods, where a study by Hills 2018 found that Montessori children showed better pro-social skills than children in traditional school. Okay, in the synthesis, I am going to address how Maria Montessori created a flexible method where the educators could include the Islamic religion in the curriculum in Montessori schools. When I look deeper into Montessori method, I see it's more supportive of what Quran said, where the freedom of Montessori allows the children to choose the activity that they want to work on based on their nature and end the task in different time based on their abilities. I don't see the freedom of choice conflict with Islamic belief. I also don't see it's a barrier to implement the Montessori method in Saudi Arabia. Another example is the reward and punishment in Montessori philosophy and Islamic philosophy. So I read some researchers and I saw that they argue with the reward and punishment in Montessori and reward and punishment in Islamic psychology, but I really, in my perspective, I do not see that there are a conflict between two of them, where the Montessori teachers have a role in the Montessori class, the Montessori classroom, which is to advise the children and direct their behaviors. I don't mean like their learning, but their behaviors. Even though most of Montessori teachers do not have reward and punishment in their classroom, you know, the poster and to encourage the good behavior and to discourage the like bad behavior. but I can see that the teacher use their spoken words and body language to encourage the good behaviors. Thus, I can see the Montessori practices didn't conflict with Islamic philosophy when the parents are responsible on educating their children and their behaviors in Islamic psychology. Okay, now I will address some ways to implement Montessori in Saudi Arabia. For example, in circle time, it's very great opportunity to teach Islamic religion in Saudi Arabia. For example, reporting surah, and surah, what I mean by surah is we take some chapters from the Holy Book, and the children should memorize it as one of the Saudi Ministry of Education standard. And telling Sunnah, which is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, words. So we can tell the Sunnah as a story in the circle time in Montessori classrooms. So Ministry of Education also have another requirement about literacy, arts, and any different requirements, math, and that all can be included in the centers. For example, the words meeting can be included in the classroom center, mixing color in the art center. I also support when the iPad is included there in the Montessori classroom. I know that technology is not welcome that much in Montessori classroom, especially for children under age 6. But including iPad and limit their time of using iPad just to support some like missing curriculum. And if the teacher cannot or difficult to her to apply some of the curriculum in that centers, they can apply it in the iPad and have the children practice that, that activity. So I was thinking to publish more research to find more ways in Montessori methods to meet with the Ministry of Education needs and establish more opportunities for children to attend Montessori classrooms. The last thought that I would bring in this presentation is when implementing Montessori in Saudi early childhood schools, the school leader should make sure that the teacher follow the objective of Saudi educational policy. They can support it by professional development sessions to improve self-efficiency for Montessori teachers, especially during their early stage of experience. So, and that professional development and also further research in this area is important to establish more Montessori schools in Saudi Arabia and all around the world to provide all the children with equal opportunity to attend Montessori classrooms. So thank you very much for listening. And this is my email address if you have any question, or I will be happy to meet you in the breaking room. And this is my references. Thank you.